All the sounds, man. All the sounds.
That sounds like fun.
I know. I've wanted to do like some hobby, just backwoods, rallying for quite a while, but I've never had the time or the I guess I don't know how much it is to get a car and mod it for a rally, but yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know either.
So I mean, I actually want to say the first time when I was getting into sim racing, the first book that I bought was Speed Secrets. It was eye opening for sure because it covers everything.
And I didn't realize, well, I guess I've learned to realize how big the sim racing world is. And, the great thing about this sport is there's something for everybody. But if you're kind of in your own little world within your world of motorsport, whether you're into drag racing or rally or autocross or sim racing or whatever it is, it's all encompassing, and it's kind of, so, I'm going along and all of a sudden I'm starting to get more and more emails from sim racers, and all of a sudden it's like,
Right.
oh, there's a whole other world out here I need to be more aware of. So it was
Right.
interesting. Yeah.
It's actually been super exciting for me just because, especially the last year or so, I keep trying to come up with ideas because I see like the future of the business being where, you can go and pursue a professional racing career, but you can, on the other end, there can be a whole world of professional sim racing. I think, I mean, the market needs a little growth. The audience needs to get a little bit bigger. The software needs to get better, but that's the way that it's going. It's getting more and more professional. So it's exciting.
Yeah. And again, I think it's, I guess it's in its infancy. And, the, I guess I look at sim racing as, there's I guess a couple of different, two, maybe three different ways of kind of looking at it. Is, one is kind of an end in itself. You want to become the best sim racer, or you want to, that's where you want to be. Another is it's a tool for track drivers to use as a, as a tool to help improve their driving. And I guess there's a third, which is just simply it's entertainment.
Right.
But each of them are, well, they're great. They're great reasons on their own.
Right. Yeah, I think it's kind of it's a new marketplace coming in. I mean, it's been around for 10 years or so, or well, more. It's been pretty quality, I guess, for 10 years. iRacing's been around, I think, since 2008. But yeah, it's like you say too, the entertainment side, the esports side. I mean, if you look at an F1 race where there's, I mean, what, anywhere from 5 to 15 million, on a weekend watching worldwide. I mean, if you had 1% of that, that's still a pretty it's still a pretty big business, a pretty big sport. If it were, those people, those fans getting into sim racing. So yeah, I think a little more time, like, a little more exposure maybe.
Yeah. What was it? I think it was Henry Ford that said that, the first car race was when somebody invented the second car, right? I
Yeah.
wonder if, the first sim race was when somebody invented the second computer. I don't know.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. And I think it's, I guess what is interesting is, I think in the beginning it was entertainment, then there was a period of time where it was, a small number of drivers used it as a training tool. And then now there's kind of this, well, it can be an end in itself, in that, it's a sport by itself. It stands on its own, 2 feet, um, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me, I guess, pro sim racers. I don't know, I personally don't know. I know a number of pro sim racers, and sort of been around on the fringes of that, but I don't know exactly how I guess, how it's all, how that's funded, how it's,
Right.
how pro it is, all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, and I guess, at some point, and I think I guess, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like there's there's a form of spectating that's already going on with sim racing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of YouTube, series. There's a lot of leagues, and it's all on YouTube. And so there's, I mean, I would say races they can be up to 5,000 views, but it's still pretty small. But yeah, I mean, as of right now, like pro is sort of in quotes because it's kind of, it's just you're in the top league and that's ranked pro, but it's not really monetized yet. Um, I think, and that's what I mean. I think whether it's more exposure, whether it's someone that needs to take the horns and do proper marketing, um, and even when I talked with David Perro last week, is being able to do proper storytelling. I think that's why F1 is so compelling because it's not just Mercedes versus Ferrari. It's Sebastian Vettel versus Lewis. It's Kimi and Bottas. There's someone that there's a personality that you can connect with too.
Yeah, I think that's people are talking, well, there's the creation of this e-racing series, um,
Yeah.
where you've got robocars kind of thing driving the track, and people are like, really, like, is anybody going to watch this? Because it's the human part of our sport that people really relate to, connect with, and really want to watch. And I guess it'll be interesting over the next few years to see how that series, what the acceptance of it is. I mean,
Mhm.
it's an incredible technology challenge, but will it become a great spectator thing? Will people want to sit and watch cars drive around that don't have a human in them?
Right.
That's a big question. And I guess, obviously sim racing, there are humans involved, but how does it get, um, how do those humans get exposed to the public?
Mhm.
And, and I think you touched on, the monetization of it. It, it's probably one of those things where it's going to take somebody to come along like a Bernie Ecclestone that goes, oh, I'm going to turn this into $1 billion.
Mhm.
And whether that's good or bad, but that's probably what it's going to take for the sport to become, I guess, well, more viewed, maybe even more acceptable, um, than it really is. I'm a
Right.
like from a driving perspective, a driver training coach perspective. I see the massive value of sim racing, and not just for the usual kind of stuff, like not just the well, you can learn a track by doing it. Well, no, there is like so much more that you can learn from sim racing. But the question is it going to become sort of an accepted stand on its own kind of form of motorsport, like drag racing, oval racing, NASCAR,
Mhm.
rally, drifting? I mean, there was a while back when drifting, Formula Drift first started, and people looked at it like, boy, that's not a sport. That's not motorsport. Well, it's gradually become accepted as a stand on its own kind of form of motorsport.
Right.
And how long is that going to take for sim racing to get there? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, they each have their own culture. So I think that's the once the niche does open up and it grows, a culture grows within there. With I mean, drift fans versus drag fans versus Formula One fans, they're all pretty different. I mean, there's those that like them all, but I would say the audiences can vary for sure. But
Yeah. um, and I love I love pretty much every form of motorsport. I mean, some I prefer over others, but it's not like I don't like the other form of motorsport. And if I had all the time in the world, I'd probably get more involved with all forms of motorsport. Um, but because I don't have all the time in the world, I kind of, I stick to the one form that I enjoy the very, very most. And uh, so that's why, like I said, to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it's something to do with motorsport, I want to be involved, and I want to see it, and I want to everything. But, that's where I think, well, I think there are some who look at drifting, they look at drag racing, they look at oval racing, whatever. And some people kind of, I don't know, they look down their nose at certain forms of the sport. And I think they're missing out on a great opportunity to enjoy something.
Right. Yeah. They're all cool in their own way. I mean, because it's also fun to mix it up. I mean, if you're watching the same thing, it does get a little bit dull at times. You mean, um, especially because it's
It,
so popular to like hate on like F1 these days. That's what just drives me nuts. It's like, well, I mean, it's a great sport, but there's also a lot more out there too if you're not happy, you know.
yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's maybe even more of a hate on NASCAR. Oh, they just drive around in circles, or drag racing. They just drive in a straight line. Big deal, Man, I did some coaching, some mental coaching with a top fuel drag racer a few years ago, and went to an NHRA event with him, and I can remember sitting down and going, "Hey, talk to me and tell me what you do in 4 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
In that 4 seconds that you go from 0 to over 300 miles an hour. Tell me what you do." Well, he probably spent 20 minutes explaining to me everything that he did in that 4 seconds. And you're like, really? Is that even possible? So, I think there's, while, hey, I'm a terrible spectator with anything, even, I don't care what form of motorsport it is. I'm not a great spectator. I like being involved in doing, but, drag racing is not something I want to sit down and watch all that much, but I have massive respect for what they do in the car. And, the same goes for drifting, and the same goes for every form of sport. And, that's where I think, for sim racing, it has gone from, there was a period of time, I think, where a lot of drivers just looked at it as like, that's silly. I mean, hey, when a 10-year-old can beat me around a racetrack, that just proves that it doesn't take skill. It takes whatever a 10-year-old's got. And, they just haven't worked through that process, that step that it takes to kind of get the comfort level with a sim racing world and unit and how that works. So, there was a period of time where I think it didn't get the respect it deserved. And now, it's pretty much, accepted practice that all the top drivers in the world use sim racing or sim training.
Mm-hmm.
So it has become way more acceptable, but still there are some that goes, well, as long as a 10-year-old can beat me, and I could beat the 10-year-old when we got behind the wheel.
Right.
See, that's different.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually kind of what there is still a bit of a gap, but that's what I've really wanted with Turn is to be able to kind of merge that gap, whether it's pro drivers, in the real world going to the sim or vice versa. I think it could happen. It can happen both ways. And I think that's exciting. That's really what has kind of fueled me the last couple of years to keep going. But so I want to get into your world, right? So you've seen a lot of drivers, you've coached a lot of people. What do you see as like the most common mistakes? Where do you usually get in their head first to start getting them to the next level?
Well, that's a big question. um, because it depends so much on, what level are we talking? Are we talking somebody that's just new to driving on track? Or are we talking about, a fairly experienced pro level driver? It's all a little bit different there, but some of the things that jump out as you ask that question, often I get asked, I mean, what does it take to be a great professional race driver? Well, it has very little to do with it. Does it? Yeah, I don't want to downplay the talent and skill that it takes, but what it takes more than anything else is commitment, desire, sacrifice, work ethic,
Mm-hmm.
those things. That's what it takes. And I don't think it matters. Again, I don't think it matters whether you're racing in Formula One, you're you're autocrossing on the weekends, you're sim racing, you're doing whatever. Ultimately it's going to come down to, well, how much time, effort, and uh, disciplined, deliberate practice are you willing to put into this? And the drivers who put the most in, and it's not just time, but it's how you use that time to practice. That is what makes I'd say that's the biggest difference in terms of just general approach.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of skill levels or skill and technique and that kind of thing, everyone says, oh, vision is the most important thing. It's how far ahead you look and where you look and that kind of stuff. And for sure, that's a big part of it. And yeah, it's a big part of it, but kind of it. I'm not going to say that's easy, but once you get that and you figure out the process of looking where you want to go, and there is a sort of a process of kind of mentally seeing, and there's kind of glancing ahead, and then there's focusing where you're going to focus, and then there's how you use your peripheral vision and all that kind of stuff. But once you kind of get that process and you practice it a little bit, it's really, again, that's a fairly simple skill. The single biggest skill technique difference that I see between the best drivers and the less than best drivers is in the braking, and it's not how late they brake. It's actually how they come off the brake pedal, how they release the brake pedal. It's when they release the brake pedal and how they come off that brake pedal, because that dictates how the car responds as you turn into the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I always say people think of the brake pedal as a tool to slow the car down. Some, if they put a little more thought into it, think it's also a tool to kind of transfer weight or load onto the front tires. But I look at how you use the brake pedal as a way to get back to full throttle sooner. If you release the brake pedal at the right time and in the right way, your car is on a better trajectory, in the right balance, the right rotation through the corner, that you can actually commit to full power sooner than somebody else. And that's why I say, the brake release is the thing that separates the best from the rest, because, most of them, once you drive for a while, the line you drive through around the track, it's pretty close. I mean, right. Subtle little differences, it's not going to be that great. Most drivers get to the point where they can get on the throttle and accelerate out of a corner pretty well. Most drivers eventually get to the point where they can brake late for a corner, but it's how you release the brake pedal that dictates how well you can enter the corner. And that dictates, well, everything else from then on out, and when you can get the full throttle coming out of the corner.
Right. And that's actually one thing that you did write in your book. One thing that still stuck with me right away, and it still does now, is, and it stepped up my speed, is you said steering with the brake and the throttle. You're steering the car more with that than you are almost with the wheel. I mean,
yes, you get to a point where it's how you manage the weight. I always say, you're a weight manager. Mm-hmm. And, it's how you manage the weight or the load of the car. And if you can do that in the right way, when you enter the corner, you use the steering wheel as a suggestion. Like, I suggest we turn in here to the right. Now we change, we manage the weight and load in the car so that the car rotates. And at that point, you can almost straighten the wheel, and then you're adjusting the direction of the car, the trajectory of the car with how you manage the weight. And, that's the technique that separates the best from the rest. But it is also, I mean, I'm just, after all these years, when I talk about it, I can't help but have a smile on my face, because that to me is what driving is really about. To drive a car through a corner on the right line. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's cool. To stand on the throttle coming out of the corner, have the car kind of drift, that's cool. But when you can get the car and you can manage it and you can make the car do things with your feet, and how you manage the weight in the car, that's the magic. That's the thing that still gets me excited to this day after all these years.
Right. That's one thing too, that my biggest hang up is I kind of got to a point where, like you said, it's like, okay, yep, I know the line, I know how to learn the track. I can get to my limit, and I'll be, say if I'm in a series and I'm practicing maybe half hour a day for during the week, getting ready for the race on the weekend. I'll get to a point where it's like, I'll put together what I think is like a killer lap. Like I feel like I'm at the limit at every corner, and then I'll end up being like 2 seconds slower than these top guys. And it's just like, man, what is going on? That is it in my setup? Is it in, maybe it is in the way I'm just not properly managing the weight, or it's one thing that I actually still struggle with. So
yeah, and sometimes there comes a point where it's commitment. And I've been coaching a friend who's a fairly serious sim racer, and I've been coaching him, and he's I've known him forever. And he kind of found that where he kind of got to a certain point, he's like, wow, I'm really fast, but where do these guys find another second or whatever it is? And by working on some of those basics, like the brake release and a couple of those kinds of things, he started to kind of see just, now he'd start to get a glimpse of what that last second looks like. And then once you get that glimpse of it, then it's a little bit of, I'm just going to make the commitment that the car is going to work, and I'm going to make it do what I want it to do. Sometimes we get so caught up in this, we got to be smooth, smooth as fast thing, that we forget that at some point in time, you kind of got to grab the car by the scruff of the neck and just make it do what you want it to do. And if you do that enough times, you get to the point where, okay, now I can actually, I can grab it by the scruff of the neck, but I can do it in a smooth way. I can do it in a very precise way. And, the other day I was drawing away on my whiteboard in my office here, and I'm kind of going, there's some kind of a graph here between smoothness and experience level and progression, where in the beginning you really need to work on being smooth, because that helps you refine your skills. And once you kind of get to a certain point, and it's not like it's a certain number of hours or whatever it is, but there's a certain point where you kind of go, okay, now I need to stop being so smooth, and I need to just kind of get messy and, really just play with the car and make it do things. And even though I'm going to be messy and I'm going to mess up a bunch of corners and I'm going to slide wide here and everything, I'm finding the edges and I'm finding the limits and I'm going over it. And 9 times out of 10, I'm bringing it back, and 1 time out of 10, I'm wadding the car up in a ball, either a simulated ball or a real one. And, you kind of get messy with the car for a while. And then if you're messy and unsmooth for a while, if you do that long enough, eventually you get to the point where it's like, I have lots of time and I can actually slow all of that down and I can smooth out my messiness. And that's where that last bit of time, whether it's a 2 seconds or 2/10 of a second, that's where it comes from. And it's smooth, messy, smooth.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I like the way you look at that. Because I've heard Hamilton talk about too, like it's he'll the way he puts together like a qualifying lap, it's trying to find a 10th here, a 10th there, and it adds up.
Oh, that's the, you know, most times when you ask a driver, a lot of times I'll be coaching a driver and, let's say they're 7/10 of a second off of where they want to be, the pole or whatever, right? And you go, where are you going to find that 7/10? And they'll think, well, I'm going to find it in the brake zone for turn
Right.
one. And you're like, no, you're not. But what if you could find a 10th of a second in turn one? Is that possible? Yeah, I could find a 10th of a second. What about turn two? Yeah, I could find a 10th of a second, maybe half a 10th, a 10th. What about turn three? Yeah, another half a 10th. And you go around the track and you go, wait a minute, there's 14 corners on this circuit. And if I could find half a 10th of a second in each one of them, I just found 7/10 of a second. Right. And yet we think that we've got to find it in one big chunk. And, early on, you find those big chunks. But when you're chipping away at that last little bit, it's going to come from half a 10th, a quarter of a 10th of, hundredths of a second in each corner. And that's what's going to make the difference. And the second you stop trying to find half a second in one place, the easier it is to find a 10th in five corners, if that makes sense.
And I really like you saying how you go over and get sloppy for a little bit and then bring it back and smooth it out, and you can find that time. I like that.
Yeah. And, one of the differences, another difference between the best and the rest is the best are just better at making mistakes.
Right.
They have made so many mistakes that 99.5% of the time, a mistake results in them running a little wide of the apex, but not the car stuffed in the tire wall. Whereas in the beginning, you make that same mistake, and I don't know, certainly not 90% of the time, but maybe 10% of the time you make a mistake and you go off a track and you crash. There's some point in there, but eventually it narrows it down to the point where it's actually, you can kind of think about driving around a racetrack as it is a series of mistakes. And if you never make a mistake, you're probably not going to be fast. Well, no, in fact, you won't be fast. And, you have to be kind of on that edge, just kind of going over, back, a little over, back, a little over, back, that kind of stuff. And the more you do that, the more it kind of fine tunes down into the amount over and under is tiny little fractions. It's not way over and it's not way under. And I think, in the beginning, that's the way we tend to drive, is we tend to be way under, going to push a little bit, way over, and to be honest, I think it's one of the challenges that a lot of race drivers, performance drivers who drive on a track, they get on a simulator, and what do? They drive way over. And there's a variety of reasons of why they do that, but they drive way over, crash, and go, oh, this is stupid. Right. and yet they would never drive that far over on the track.
Yeah, it is.
So it's getting better at going over and just bringing it back and just, again, making it so that you just barely go over. And the best, like I said, they make a lot of mistakes. They make as many mistakes as anybody else does. They're just smaller. They recognize them sooner. They fix them sooner. So it's little fine tuning kind of things.
What about data analysis? I mean, it's really important, of course, but typically, do you use Motec usually, or what do you prefer?
Well, to be honest, right now, so I'm in a situation as a coach where I use whatever system the driver, the car, the team has. So, in a typical season, I bounce around from data system, from Motec to AIM to Race Logic to Magneti Marelli. I'm using so many different systems. I've actually now, so there's a new product out there called Track Attack, trackattackapp.com, or no, .io. And it's a software platform that you can take Motec, you can take AIM, you can take whatever data you have, and you can put it into that, and it will overlay Motec over AIM, and or over Race Logic or whatever. And so when you ask me what do I prefer, I use Track Attack now because I can take the data from whatever system the driver that I'm coaching or working with is using, and I can just put it in there, and it's consistent. And as a coach, I can tell you, I get to a race weekend and I'm going, oh yeah, this is Magneti Marelli this weekend. The hotkey is this. Oh no, sorry, that's the hotkey for Motec. Yeah, okay. So I'm always, I'm swapping back and forth so many times, and now it's just like, oh, this is fantastic because I just stick it all into Track Attack, and I kind of need to. I need to learn one software, Track Attack, and now I can just use that. So I'm a huge fan of using data, but I also understand the limitations of it. And what I find fascinating about using data is, yes, it tells you a lot about the technique, but what I find most fascinating is looking at a squiggly line and looking at the shape of that line and going, the driver's scared. And that to me is interesting. Or why is the driver's steering the lateral G kind of slowly building up as opposed to being fairly more crisp on the turn in? And I go, And at that point, I'd say to the driver, so on corner entry, how does the car feel? And the driver says, well, when I turn in, sometimes it feels like the back end's going to come around, like it's going to oversteer. And I go, I can see that in the data, because what's happening is I see the driver kind of cheating in, or what I call crabbing in. They kind of start to pull away from the edge of the track and they gently turn in, and they're afraid to turn the wheel crisply because they know that if they do that, the back end's going to snap around and they're going to be facing backwards. And I could see that in the data beforehand. And that's the part that I find, it's one thing just to lay two laps over top of one another and go, okay, you're faster here, you're slower here. It's being able to look at some of the other data and go, but why? Why are you faster here? Why are you slower there? And that's where, I think data does answer a lot of questions, but the other beautiful thing about data is it helps you ask the right questions. Like, why are you turning in a little early here? Why are you turning in a little bit late? Why are you coming off the brakes so quickly here? And, why are you on the throttle, then off, and then back on the throttle? And, it just helps you ask better questions. And if you ask enough of the right questions, eventually you go, now I know what the answer is. And the answer is this, whether it's a car setup thing or a driving technique thing.
A lot of times I would look at a lap and I would think, is it a setup issue or is it a technique issue? And that's kind of, so it's funny because I've got your book, and then I also have a more of a technical book where it's more setups type stuff, so I can kind of flip through both and see if I can fix the problem. But yeah, that's one thing that I think it's just probably inexperience too, kind of learning it.
Yeah, to me, so first of all, you're not the only driver in the world that's ever kind of questioned, is it the car or is it me? And in fact, you should always be asking yourself that question. And that's where what I was going to say is, you can fix 99% of all the issues if you ask the right questions. And I do a lot of webinars and coaching and everything with one of the best race engineers, Jeff Brown. And Jeff and I do a lot of. We've actually done seminar workshops for drivers and teams together where we actually role play kind of kind of like me coming in down, because he and I have worked together on the track like this, where I come off the track and I come in and I go, car's understeering, and Jeff goes, where? Well, in turn one. Where in turn one? On corner entry. Great. Okay, on corner entry to turn one. What are you doing with the steering wheel at that point? I'm still turning in when it starts to understeer. Okay, what are you doing with the brakes and the throttle at that point? I'm just come off the brake pedal when the car starts to understeer. If I just said the car understeers in turn one, Jeff's reaction as a race engineer might be, okay, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But the second we dug down by asking these questions, to the point where it's like, okay, it's as I come off the brake pedal, the car understeers. Okay, now there's two things there. As a driver, I could go, oh, okay, now that I've figured that out, could I move my whole brake zone in a little further so I'm delaying when I come off the brake pedal, and therefore I'm moving the understeer later in the corner to the point where it starts to understeer at about that point where I'm already starting to unwind the wheel. So the understeer kind of is a non-issue. And then Jeff, as the engineer, could go, okay, I can help. If I put more rebound in the front shocks, the front dampers, that'll kind of stop the front end of the car from so quickly unloading as you come off the brake pedal. And then you can go, you could do either one of those or both. And so I guess I guess what I'm really trying to say is that sometimes we're too quick to try to find the answer, and we don't spend enough time asking the right questions. Because if you ask the right questions, the answers become pretty darn obvious. Now, having said that, you will always be going, is it the car? Is it me? And I think you should always be looking at both.
Yeah, that's kind of the game, I suppose.
Yeah, it was just I was coaching a driver recently, and I was there at the track one day. I was going to have a chance to coach him just for one day, and his thinking was every time I went on the track, I would be coaching him on his driving. But one of the sessions, I just said, I want us to make some big changes to the car. And he's like, well, why? And he says, because I want to see how you react to it. But more importantly, I want to see, is there a direction we can learn in terms of car setup? And I said, right now, like if you just went through turn 10 miles an hour faster, what would happen? And he says, I'd go off the track. And I go, okay, which end of the car would go off the track first, the front end or the rear end? He goes, well, the rear end would go around. Okay, so the car would oversteer off the track then. Okay, let's make a big enough change here to give the car more rear grip in that corner and the other corners that are similar speed. So let's make a fairly big enough change to see what happens. And, he went out and he went faster, but he also said, it almost got to the point where we've gone too far with it. And I said, great, at least we got a direction. We can back that chassis change. We can back that off a little bit, bring it back to more of a in-between thing. But if we just taken like a small little swipe at the setup change, you might have come back in and go, I think it's better, but I'm not sure. So I wanted a big enough change that he would go, for sure, we gave the car more rear grip now. And the combination of doing that, and I think there's a lot of drivers who are afraid to make too big a change with the car. And, they're so caught up in this, well, I'm just going to make a little change to see if I can make the car better. That's what practice sessions, that's what test sessions are for, is make big enough changes where you can go, okay, that's the right direction, and maybe you go too far, but at least you learn something. And the other thing I think is sometimes you go, well, that didn't work. Well, that's okay, because if everything you do works, you could make the argument that you're actually
Mhm.
not learning a whole lot. Because if you kind of go, okay, we're going to soften the rear of the car. Okay, it gave us a little more rear grip. Okay, expected that. Didn't learn anything new there. I mean, it maybe helped it. But if you soften the rear of the car and the car got worse, you go, huh, why? And then you start to think, oh, okay, well, maybe the car's got too much roll. It's kind of rolling over on itself, and that's what's causing the oversteer. In which case, we'd actually have to stiffen. Hey, we just learned something here that sometimes you got to go the opposite direction of what you think is real or what you think is the right way. And um, so it's interesting. I think we get so caught up in this. Oh, let's make fine little adjustments, and we're fine tuning the car. Well, take a big swipe at it, find out, get a direction, and if it doesn't work, go, great, I learned something from that.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed and wasted so much time on in practice sessions is I'll try to make adjustments, and I'll just do a small enough tweak where I don't notice a difference, and it's like, well, should I go back or should I keep going?
Yeah. Take a, do a swipe at it where it's going to be a big enough change that you're going to go, I know the direction we're going in. And don't be afraid to make some changes. I mean, hey, even, especially sim race, I mean, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Right.
Um, and I know some drivers, at the track who, they're afraid to make some big changes. And, they're like, well, go up on tire pressures by half a PSI. I'm like, really? How about 6? Go up 6 PSI. And if the car, if it gains grip on that end or makes the car more responsive on that end of the car, great, you learned something. Maybe you've gone too far and you can back it off a bit, but at least you've got a direction then. So don't be afraid to take some big swipes at it.
That's one thing that David Pearl last week talked about is when he uses the sim for practice is a lot of times he'll get in a car in the sim with just chronic understeer, and he'll drive that for a while, and then he'll switch it over to one with chronic oversteer, and he'll drive that, and so then he can kind of get the feel and understand how both behave.
So one of the things that when I coach drivers, I will often go to the track and I will say to the team or the driver, the engineer, whoever they've got it, I'll say, I want us to mess up the car. Like I want us to cause some handling issues. And, there are some young drivers that I've worked with who early in their career, we would go to the track and we would remove a front wing off the car, or we would take the wing off the back of the car, or we would, really make some big suspension changes with the car and make the car understeer or oversteer big time. And then I would say to the driver, okay, let's say they're turning a lap time of 1:30, and we make the car understeer really bad. And I go, okay, now your job is to get as close back to the 1:30 as you can. So, they might be 1:32, 1:31, they get down. And then they start, we talk and we work on this, like, okay, what can you do with your driving technique? Should you trail brake longer? Should you trail brake less? Can you turn in earlier? Can you turn in later? What happens if you adjust your line here? And the driver then starts going, and it's amazing how often a driver will then get down to close to that 1:30 lap time again. And then you put the car back to, the right setup, and now they're doing 1:29. And really, as a driver, they have developed their database of driving techniques to adapt to the car. So I think there's a couple of things there. One is, making those adjustments on the sim. Yes, you're testing some things and you're going, how's the car going to respond? But I think you're building your repertoire, your database of how do you adapt to a poorly handling car. And when you learn that, you actually become faster, even or especially when the car is handling perfectly.
Yeah, especially because in the Pro-Am cars, he talks about, I mean, typically they set up the car for the AM drivers. They set it up to have understeer, so obviously to keep the car safe. So the pro drivers need to kind of get used to that and learn how to be fast with more understeer, which is interesting. But
Yeah,
the thing
that's go ahead.
the
Yeah.
thing that I've kind of found to be hard. I mean, it's really easy to find out that you're oversteering, but um, that the thing that I've kind of found out hard to be hard is understeer through a corner, because I have to ask myself, am I just over driving, or is there actual too much understeer in the car?
Hmm. Yeah,
I mean, it's
that's a
pretty
tricky.
specific to to what the situation is, but yeah, that's one thing that I was kind of would struggle with a little bit.
The I'm going to say the classic approach to figuring that out is turn the wheel a little more. If the car turns, you don't have understeer. If the car doesn't respond to that extra steering angle, you have understeer. Um, do you have time to actually do that in the middle of the corner? Sometimes you do, sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
don't. A lot of times you don't. But it's kind of that. Is there a numbness in the steering? Meaning, if I turn it just a little bit more, does it just feel like, well, it's not responding to that? Well, car's understeering. Um, that's the, I guess I'm going to say the typical classical way of figuring what that is. But again, at speed, not so easy, right?
Right, right. So
Yeah.
one thing, I mean, like I said earlier, you've talked to enough people and seen enough drivers in your career. Funding, what is your experience on maybe advice, career advice on funding a career?
Uh, well, the first thing I'll say there is, there is this. Um, well, there's the theory that you can't make it in racing these days without being rich and without having, somebody paying a lot of money. And I don't really totally buy that. If you look at the grid in most forms of racing, from Formula One to Indy cars to NASCAR to sports car racing to whatever, I'm talking that level. I mean, I'm not going to comment on drag racing and drifting and stuff like that, but that type of racing, if you look at the starting grid, there are far more drivers that came from not having money than came from money. And yes, there are exceptions. You look in Formula One, you go, Lance Stroll come from mega dollars, right? Okay, but actually, he's a bit of a exception to the rule there. If you look at most of the drivers, they didn't come from super wealthy families. They might have come from okay family, but there's a lot. I mean, Lewis Hamilton did not come from a wealthy
Mm-hmm.
family. Sebastian Vettel did not come from a wealthy family. Neither did Kimi Räikkönen. I mean, if you look at IndyCar right now, Alexander Rossi's father paid enough to get him to certain places, but then they found ways to find the money. Scott Dixon did not have come from a wealthy family. Um, you look at the top drivers, and the key there is they found a way. And man, we could spend the next 8 hours talking about what that way is, but it is the biggest difference there is how bad do you want it, and how hard are you willing to work to get the funding to do what you want to do or what you need to do. And because it is a need, right? It's not a want, it's a need. We need to drive cars.
Right.
um, but so again, I mean, I can't tell you, do this and this and you'll land a big sponsor. What I will say is that, if you're looking for sponsorship, what matters is what the sponsor wants or the potential sponsor wants. it's something that I learned, and it's something I see a lot of drivers make the mistake of, is going to a company, a person, whoever, and saying, if you give me money, I will go and race and I'll win a bunch of races. And, you kind of got to put yourself in the other person's shoes and go, so who cares?
Right.
You know, um, you need to look at, like, if that person went and said, I can help you sell more of your product or your services. And if you said that and the person said, how? And you say, well, through this, and this, I figured out a way. And, sticking the name on the side of the car probably isn't going to do it, because, when was the last time you just looked at a name on the side of a race car and went, oh, I'm going to go
Right.
buy their product? Um, you know, yeah, brand name awareness, it's a contributor, but it's really probably not the thing that's going to make the difference. And so, you need to figure out, uh, the drivers. And again, I've been guilty of this years ago, is, you make this big long list of, here's all these people, I'm just going to fire out, the shotgun approach. I'm going to fire out a letter or a proposal or something like that to all these different companies and convince them to sponsor me. Forget it. That's a waste of time. What you really need to do is go, company B over here. I found, you do the research and you find out that this is their product or their service. This is who their customers are. This is what they currently do with marketing. This is that. And you go, actually, when I really think about it, I can't think of a way that I could help them sell more products or services. Okay, company C, you do the same kind of research and you go, ah, you know, if I did this, connected them with this other potential sponsor I have, and I connected them and they start doing some business to business deals, or I can line them up with a retailer that's going to help them do this, or I can generate a bunch of interesting publicity, media coverage that has little to nothing to do with what happens on the track.
Mhm.
You know, I can help company C, and you go in and you go, I can help your company, and here's how. Oh, and by the way, go in and ask some questions. The best approach that I ever used is when I got into a company and said something along the lines of, if I was, if your company was to ever get involved with a motorsport marketing program, I hate to use the word sponsorship because sponsorship sounds like a charity. So a marketing program, how do you think that it could help your company? How, just use your imagination. Like, if you could have that level of conversation with somebody, and if they sat there and went, well, if somebody could ever do this, this, and this, and you're making notes and you're going, I can do that. Well, now you don't have to sell them because it's their own
Right.
idea. So, I don't know. There's just some rambling thoughts on the whole subject of funding, I guess, and ultimately it comes down to how bad do you want it and how hard are you willing to work to make it, to find that funding. The second thing would be, look at your network. There's probably somebody that who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who can give you an in to that company C, who you've identified as a company that you can actually help, you can actually do something for. Um, and, and then try to make it their idea.
Right. Especially because, like, what you're saying too is there's so much, if you can create so much value towards the business. I mean, putting their logo on your door is just a logistical thing. It's not, that's not the end result. You're creating all this value in this partnership outside of that. And the actual sponsorship on the door is really, you know,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of it's the price of entry.
right.
Um, and I know of motorsport sponsors who their name isn't even on the car, but they're funding motorsport programs, and it's because of whether it's a business to business deal, corporate entertainment program, whatever, but they're funding part of a motorsport program or a race team, and their name isn't even on the car, or if it is, it's so small that you wouldn't even
Right.
notice it half the time.
That's the thing too, is having your message be out there. I mean, that's part of just anything you do. If you're gonna, I mean, if you're gonna do it, and you want to do it right. It's gonna what you do is gonna come out and what you with everyone you talk to. I mean, and and then you can find out, oh, this person likes this, and I know I have this other connection, this other friend over here, and then you can connect them that way, and that's where value does get added. It's the relationship building.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a lot of times when I've worked with young drivers, one of the things I'll have them do is I say, I want you to draw me a mind map. Basically, start with a little circle with put your name in it and then go, okay, who are your parents? Draw a line off to your parents. Okay, who do your parents know? Well, they know this person and they know that company and they know this. And then, who are your friends? Who do they know? And who are those friends know? And you just kind of you draw this big mind map off of all this. And at some point you go, wait a minute, a friend of my dad knows somebody who owns a company over here, and my team owner also knows somebody that knows that same person. We can come to that person from two different angles. You've just increased your chances of getting them involved. But again, the thing you got to understand is it's what's in it for them is what matters. And even still, you could have the perfect program in the world that is just absolute killer, going to sell more product, more service, whatever. It's killer. And often you'll still get a no. And the reasons for that is, first of all, wasn't invented here. Number two, their marketing person doesn't want to be seen as not having created it themselves. So it's kind of related to the not invented here thing. And the third thing is sometimes you'll find somebody and you go, the final decision maker, they don't like racing. They
Right.
like golf or something else. And they're going to go, you know what? We're going to get involved with some sports marketing thing. We're going to go sponsor golf tournaments. And you could go, but, it doesn't matter. In the end, the decision maker prefers something else over what you're doing. It's
Right.
pretty tough sell then.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, marketing just in general. I've really tried to do a deep dive the last year and a half into that whole world.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? The one thing I will say is, for many years, because I came from having no money and, having to fund my own race programs and stuff, what I learned through the process of putting together motorsport marketing programs, from connecting with people, from networking, all of those things have been so hugely valuable to everything else I've done in my life. There are times when, it's like you're getting up in the morning and go, oh my God, I got to go through another day of getting another 100 no's. Cause it's a little bit of a numbers game. At some point, it's like, if I get enough people saying no to me, eventually somebody will say yes. And there are times you're just like, I can't stand another day of another 100 no's, but you got to go through that. And the long-term benefits of that have paid for itself so many times over. I'm just so grateful for having been able to, but I've been so grateful and so happy that so many people said no to me through the years.
Right, right. Yeah, there's a really, really short but good book. It's called Go for No, that I read back when I was in sales. And yeah, there's pretty much target the conversation and wait, get to them until they say no. And, that's the result that you want. And when they do, you can go on and go to the next one and get another no. But I think it's getting a no the right way too. It's not just, like you said earlier, copying and pasting an email, because I get so many of those where it's, hey, I'm a 16-year-old. I'm in this series. Can you sponsor me?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't even respond, just because it's not going about it the right way.
Yeah. In fact, because I get a lot of those, and in a way, I think the best thing I can do is say no, because if I
Right.
actually said yes,
That's
I
true.
would have trained them to think that that's the right way to think, and it's not. Um, so it's a tough one, but it is absolutely doable for sure. It's just a matter of putting the effort in and connecting yourself with the right people and surrounding yourself with the right people.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. I know you got a podcast. Why don't you go ahead and plug that? What can you plug? How can people get to you?
Uh, Everything I do is at speedsecrets.com. And, whether it's the podcast that I do or, a link to the weekly newsletter that I put out, Speed Secrets Weekly, um, the webinars, the track, virtual track walk training videos, everything I do is at speedsecrets.com. And, um, uh, I get a massive kick. What still drives me to this day is helping drivers drive better. And again, it doesn't matter whether they're drifting, sim racing, autocrossing, driving in Formula One. I don't care what it is. I love that part of it. So if if you want to become a better driver, go to speedsecrets.com and come and hang out with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Been fun.
All right. You bet.